Another common cause of suspension and expulsion is implicit bias. Implicit bias can be thought of as an iceberg. Above the surface is your conscious and reflective mind, your effortful, slow, logical, calculating, and limited resources. But below the surface is your unconscious and reflexive mind. You make automatic, fast, intuitively driven, emotional, stereotypic, and large resourced decisions. Bias is a human condition. We are unaware that we are making biased decisions. It's triggered by brains making quick judgments and assessments of people and situations. It's influenced by our own backgrounds, our cultural environments, and personal experiences. It is compounded by the belief that our perceptions, beliefs, and experiences are objectively true. Negative information becomes more salient and more pertinent to biased decisions. And our biased decisions are easily triggered under cognitive or emotional load. Early childhood teachers are often under cognitive emotional load all of the time. This can make them easily subject to making biased decisions about young children. Growing evidence about implicit bias and racial disparities in expulsion rates show that Black boys are perceived as less innocent, less human, and more deserving of punishment. Threat commonly associated with Black men can be generalized to Black boys as young as 5. Underprepared early learning teachers are more likely to use punitive and rejecting disciplinary techniques. If you would like more information, you can look at the NACCE website to review a large study of early childhood teachers and implicit biases. Early childhood mental health consultation, like we talked about previously, shows significant impacts to reductions in suspension and expulsion. This is why we need to advocate for increased access to mental health consultation in early childhood settings. Next, we will talk about teacher health and well-being. Research shows that teachers in high-stress jobs are more likely to engage in exclusionary disciplinary practices like expulsion. For our final policy issue, we will be looking at the expanding mental health well-being support for staff in early childhood settings. This quote is from the suspension and expulsion statement put out by the Department of Education and Health and Human Services. Finally, early childhood programs should promote teacher health and wellness and ensure that teachers work reasonable hours with breaks. Programs should have strong relationships with community-based service providers that can offer teachers additional social services as needed, including health and mental health supports. Promoting teacher wellness may strengthen teachers' capacity to form strong, nurturing relationships with children, as well as reduce teacher job stress, which has been shown to be predictive of preschool expulsions. This is a new area for policy and emerging research. Most of this research is being done at the Buffett Early Childhood Institute right here in Nebraska. Why teacher well-being? Providing care to young children is an intense and demanding job. Teachers face challenges that undermine their ability to create and maintain an optimal classroom environment. Increasing numbers of children come to preschool with serious emotional regulation problems that have put them at risk for behavioral difficulties and school failure. Parents and teachers are under pressure to meet the demands of running a household or classroom, personal concerns, and responding to the child or children in their care. Stress is natural and can be inevitable, but stress can take a toll on your health and effectiveness as a parent or provider. Stress doesn't just affect you, it also impacts the child and children in your care. Teachers' depressive symptoms are related to lower levels of classroom quality and teacher-child interaction quality. Common sources of provider stress include tension with parents and coworkers, having too much work to do and not enough time, feeling unable to make use of your skills and abilities, having too many children per your caregivers, having environmental issues such as noise, lack of space, children needing things immediately, personal concerns such as family, financial, and health concerns, having few or no opportunities for professional development or advancement, lack of clear communication with coworkers and supervisors, and feeling like you have little control over how you perform your job. Although not specifically listed on this slide, stress related to system challenges, job expectations, lack of support from supervisors, and being part of a team are reflected in some of these examples. Refer in our module to the Posters for Stress and Taking Care of Ourselves booklet for more information. Amy Roberts, in collaboration with researchers at the Buffett Early Childhood Institute, developed an ecological framework of teacher well-being, which identifies not only individual factors, which are shown in green, that are linked to teacher well-being, but also contextual factors, shown in blue. If we focus only on the easily treatable individual factors, such as sending teachers to trainings, building competencies, for instance, only a small sliver of well-being is addressed. If real change is to happen, the onus cannot be solely on the educators themselves. Workplaces, policies, and education systems must also work together to provide specific supports for teachers and change the culture around teaching to help reduce teacher stress, minimize the negative effects of that stress, and improve teacher well-being and student outcomes. Teachers cannot be expected to try harder, breathe deeper, and fix their well-being. Organizations, systems, and policies play a crucial role in supporting teacher well-being, and our teachers deserve better. Now we will shift into looking at some emerging and expanding research areas. We have long known that poverty is associated with poor outcomes for children on many dimensions of development that are important to us as a society, including the quality of children's learning and achievement in school, and the development of behavior problems or psychopathology, as well as the completion of high school and employment as an adult. Most studies of poverty have focused on urban poverty, or the studies were nationally representative samples, without a focus on rural families or family processes. New and emerging research on poverty impacts on families and children in rural communities are important and emerging. There are more than 11 million infants and toddlers under age 3 in the United States. 45%, 5.2 million, live in low-income families. 23%, 2.6 million, live in poor families. The percentage of infants and toddlers in low-income families surpasses that of adults. In addition, children under 3 years are more than twice as likely as adults 65 years and older to live in poor families. The percentage of children who live in low-income and poor families vary by age group. Children under 3 are more likely to live in low-income and poor families than older children. The percentage of low-income and poor infants and toddlers vary by race and ethnicity. Whites comprise the largest share of all infants and toddlers living in low-income families, 36%, while Hispanics make up the largest share of poor children in this age group, 36%. Black, American Indian, and Hispanic children are disproportionately low-income and poor. 69% of Black infants and toddlers, 1 million, live in low-income families. 64% of American Indian infants and toddlers, about 50,000, live in low-income families. 63% of Hispanic infants and toddlers, 1.8 million, live in low-income families. 33% of white infants and toddlers, 1.9 million, live in low-income families. 29% of Asian infants and toddlers, about 200,000, live in low-income families, and 40% of infants and toddlers of some other race, 300,000, live in low-income families. Emerging research looks at the intersection of poverty and rurality. The poverty rate in the South is above 20%. 1 in 5 people living in rural America lives below the poverty line. Poverty rates are higher in rural areas for almost every demographic. Nearly a third of Native Americans live in poverty, and of the country's 2.1 million Indians, about 400,000 of whom live on reservations, they have the highest rates of poverty, unemployment, and disease of any ethnic group in America. American Indians earn only a little more than half as much money as the average American. One of the most salient issues for rural poor in America are child care deserts. A childcare desert is defined as a ratio of more than 3 young children for every licensed childcare slot. Approximately one-third of young children are regularly in the care of someone who is not a relative. When the number of licensed childcare slots is insufficient to reach at least one-third of young children under 5, the likelihood that parents face difficulty finding childcare increases. This could affect employment decisions or force families to turn to unlicensed options. The childcare search often involves stress, waiting lists, high costs, and compromises. Here is a map of the childcare deserts in Nebraska. This comes from an interactive map from AmericanProgress.org. I invite you to explore this map if you do not live in Nebraska and find out where the childcare deserts are for your area. In a recent report, the Center for American Progress examined 9 states that provided childcare supply data for specific age groups and found that childcare slots were more than 3 times scarcer for infants and toddlers than they were for preschoolers. Using the childcare deserts threshold of at least 1 licensed childcare slot for every 3 children, more than 95% of the counties in that analysis would be considered infant-toddler childcare deserts. 95%. Consistent with the findings of this report, infant-toddler childcare shortages were found to be worse in rural and low-income areas. Infant and toddler childcare is scarcer than care for other age groups, largely because it is more expensive to provide. Infants and toddlers require more supervision and interaction with adults, making smaller staff ratios essential. In addition, childcare subsidy rates cover an even smaller portion of the cost of providing quality care for infants and toddlers than they do for preschoolers. As a result, providers struggle to care for young children at a price that families can afford. The near universal shortage of licensed childcare for infants and toddlers has negative consequences for working parents. When parents are unable to access care for their young children, they are forced to make career sacrifices. A recent survey found that 77% of parents of young children stated that they or someone in their family experienced negative impacts to their career because of childcare considerations. Even if parents stay in the workforce, they often must weave together a patchwork of childcare arrangements that lacks the quality assurances of licensed care. In addition, childcare teachers who work with infants and toddlers face a so-called wage penalty, earning an average of $2 less per hour than teachers serving older children, even when controlling for education level.